Have we made things too convenient for ourselves? It sounds like a dumb question, but the user-friendly, experience-optimized, child-safe, seamless, frictionless, forgiving, and intuitive world we have built around ourselves may genuinely be undermining our ability to learn basic concepts, take basic responsibility, and even hold down a basic job. Multiple studies on different areas ranging from personal finance to career skills down to basic critical thinking have highlighted this trend, and unfortunately, it only seems to be getting worse. Modern technology has undoubtedly made our lives more convenient, but that isn't necessarily the problem just by itself. And while it's easy, and honestly a little bit funny, to point at the kids these days with their iPads and their 6-7s, this by itself is really not that different from what every generation has said about every other generation that came after them since the Industrial Revolution. Not many of you watching would know how to use a city directory to plan out an unknown route, because almost all of us have a perfectly up-to-date GPS sitting in our pocket at all times. There is arguably no real difference between that and people from the early 1900s not knowing how to start a fire with sticks. In both cases, modern technology had just made those skills irrelevant. So then, what's the difference today? Well, that's what researchers are trying to figure out, because, well, there really is something different today. And there are some theories that are each worth understanding. But there is also the problem of what these tools are actually trying to achieve. Does Facebook actually want you making real connections? Do dating apps want you to find healthy, compatible relationships? Buy now, pay later, making informed financial decisions? Kalshi understanding statistics? Robinhood beating the market? Or, well, yeah, even YouTube, giving you the content you were looking for rather than the entertainment they mindlessly serve you. In a fight between easier and better, it does feel like the market is overwhelmingly favoring easier. And then, of course, above all of these today, there are AI tools that almost certainly have the ability to augment and enhance real thinking and productivity, but are almost universally being sold as a cost-effective way to just replace it. The tools that we have used to make our lives easier have become exponentially more complex, while the tasks they are enabling have become extremely simple by design. So on top of all of this, we should probably also ask ourselves what happens if we pass down a world that future generations are too dumb to maintain.
Literally tens of millions of kids who may never catch up. And so this has to be, for me, it's like a national emergency.
I'm working, I'm trying to get it back so that we can have this beautiful, look at that angle.
Some folks have been trying to push forward these kinds of financial markets for years, but it never happened. How did you make this work?
Right now, you need various accounts to trade across all these markets.
There's a continued downturn that accelerated during the pandemic with little signs of slowing down.
Now, here's some key takeaways that I found in this study. 72% of teens say that they often or sometimes feel peaceful when they're phone less.
When you use Apple Pay, that's real money. That's true American dollars.
Okay, so before we get into exactly how we are conveniencing ourselves into being big dum-dums, we should probably address whether this is even real, or just the same intergenerational bickering that has existed forever. Because, well, for most of modern history, it really has just been a baseless complaint. Every single generation since the Industrial Revolution has looked at the next one and decided that they were softer, lazier, and less capable. And every time, they have been largely wrong. Through the entirety of the 20th century, measured intelligence across the developed world actually rose by about 3 IQ points per decade in what psychologists call the Flynn effect. Sure, we stopped learning how to run a printing press, but we built computers that gave us access to an almost infinite library of knowledge, and we got smarter in the fields that counted. This trend had been seen in pretty much every country that had industrialized, until very recently. Since about the mid-2000s, researchers in Norway, Denmark, Finland, the UK, France, Germany, and the Netherlands have all reported the Flynn effect either stalling or reversing. Here in America, the National Assessment of Educational Progress has shown the biggest decline in reading since 1990 and the first ever score drops in mathematics for school-age students. And the most recent OECD PISA results showed math performance across the developed world falling at a rate that had never been measured before. So, for the first time in the history of actually measuring this stuff, generations really have started getting a little bit dumber over time, and some generations are getting dumber much faster than others. Now, the immediate reaction to this trend is to blame the screens or the kids, but we aren't just getting dumber generation to generation. As time goes on, even older people who weren't raised on a diet of cocoa melons and skibbity toilets have also developed a case of the stupid. This becomes especially fascinating, albeit a little scary, when you consider the environmental factors we are not dealing with today, like leaded gasoline and whatever passed for painkillers back in the day. So there is a little bit more going on here, and there is no silver bullet. There are, however, multiple headwinds that should at least be considered in parallel. The first is that a lot of the modern technology that has been rewarded in the marketplace has not really expanded human capability. It has just removed friction. And removing friction very often removes the very thing that was making people capable in the first place. Take something as simple as balancing a checkbook. Almost nobody on this side of 40 has ever done it, and nobody is mourning that particular chore. But manually reconciling every transaction against a paper statement forced people to actually look at every dollar they had spent. Modern payment systems do the exact opposite of that, and they do it by design. Something like Buy Now, Pay Later is specifically engineered to separate a person as much as possible from their spending decisions because the whole business model is to reduce the friction of consumption. Now, we know this is not just a simple anecdote, because these companies use it as a selling point when they are trying to sign retailers up to work with their platform. So they really aren't even trying to hide it. Theoretically, you could export all of your transactions into an Excel sheet at the end of the month and do a proper review. But let's be honest, nobody, Klarna maxing their Coachella weekend is actually doing that. Apparently, this is a thing. Anyway, there is a very good reason why ease has become more desirable to investors than capability. The tools we have built to make our lives easier have become extremely complicated and extremely expensive to produce, which means for them to pay for themselves, increasingly their audience has needed to become the product, rather than just the user of the tool. User-friendly and innocent-looking payments mean less thinking, more spending, and ultimately more revenue for the companies designing them. Facebook, TikTok, and yes, even YouTube are not really tools of social connection or entertainment. They are tools to harvest attention, and are clearly working. And a lot of other modern tools have been designed to be user-friendly at the direct expense of versatility or practical application. Kids who have grown up with computers their whole lives often have less of a clue how to troubleshoot basic problems or even print a document, because the tablets they grew up on were designed to hide the plumbing behind a clean interface. Now, none of this is inherently a bad thing. Convenience is good, and we shouldn't be manufacturing difficulty just for the sake of it. But being able to simply figure things out, adapt when something doesn't work perfectly, and take basic responsibility for our own actions is a huge part of the value that humans currently bring to the workforce, the economy, and society in general. When every tool we interact with is designed to require less of us, it should not be a surprise that we end up having less to give. And the consequences of that have already started showing up across 3 distinct areas of the economy, each worse than the last. So it's time to learn how money works to find out what happens when we build a world too convenient to get out of. Speaking of convenience, the reason every app, every checkout page, and every subscription button feels suspiciously easy these days is not an accident. It's marketing psychology, and the people who study it know exactly which buttons in your brain to push. If you want to see how all of this gets made, the team at HubSpot put together a free guide called The Science of Marketing Psychology. And it breaks down the actual cognitive biases that companies use to get you to click, buy, and come back. It walks through stuff like anchoring, loss aversion, and the decoy effect, which is the reason why there's always a medium popcorn priced weirdly close to the large one. What I like about it is that it's not just a list of tricks. It explains the research behind why these things work on us, even when we know they're happening. Whether you run a business, write online, or just want to understand why you keep buying things you didn't plan to buy, it's worth a read. You can grab it for free at the link in my description or scan the QR code on screen. Okay, so these incentives have been quietly rewarding the easier is better model for decades now, and the consequences are starting to show up in a few places we really can't afford them. And the first of those is in the workplace. Younger generations are, according to more or less every industry survey over the last 2 years, struggling at work. A survey from Intelligent.com last year found that 47% of managers cited a lack of initiative as a serious problem with recent hires, and nearly 4 in 10 employers said they now actively prefer older workers over recent grads, even after accounting for the expectation of higher salaries. Now again, every generation of managers in history has complained that their new hires are soft, but the specific nature of the complaint this time is different. These workers have spent their entire lives being coddled in their role of student and consumer, which meant every awkward decision was handled for them long before they ever had a first day on the job. Both of those roles have been aggressively re-engineered over the last 2 decades to remove every possible moment of ambiguity. Teachers grade on rubrics that are published in advance. Learning apps tell people exactly which button to press next. Dating apps remove the awkward human element of approaching someone in person. Food delivery apps remember your order. And investment apps round up your spare change and invest it on your behalf. Unironically, many consumers report feeling overwhelmed by the choice of what piece of content to watch on their preferred streaming service, so they just give up and go back to scrolling through content that is picked for them. And I mean, I personally want to sound superior to this point, but I have absolutely done this myself. Every single one of these improvements has quietly removed a moment where a person used to have to stop, figure something out, and decide for themselves. Then on day 1 of their actual job, somebody hands them a task with no rubric, no tutorial, no autoplay, and no obvious right answer, and asks them to go and figure it out, which feels like a character flaw, right up until you realize it's the exact behavior their entire upbringing rewarded. And the really awkward bit for employers is that being genuinely good at just figuring things out is genuinely one of the most valuable skills anybody can bring to any career. It is the exact thing managers have usually trusted humans over software to do, because software, by its nature, still struggles with a problem it hasn't seen before. Although unfortunately, if the studies are to be believed, we are simultaneously getting worse at this while the clankers are getting better. But more on that later. Which brings us to the second problem, and it starts much earlier than anybody's first job. The iPad Kid meme has started being a measurable phenomenon. Across the developed world, there is a clear trend of declining, but more importantly, diverging test scores. The OECD's latest PISA results showed that math scores across its member countries fell by roughly 15 points between 2018 and 2022. That was the single largest consecutive drop since the test was first administered. Now, even though this did fit into a longer-term trend, the larger-than-average drop could have been written off as one-time effects of COVID teaching from home. But the concerning detail was that these test scores didn't fall evenly. The NAEP found that the top-performing students largely held their ground while the bottom-performing students fell off a cliff, suggesting that the convenience economy isn't dragging everybody down equally. It is dragging down the kids with the least ability to push back against it. The remote learning shakeup didn't affect all students equally either. For advanced and already disciplined students, it was largely fine. A quiet room and a laptop let them learn at their own pace without classroom distractions. For underperforming students, well, it gave them much easier access to Fortnite instead. User-friendly and highly engaging technology is generally hard to snap yourself out of, even for fully grown adults who should, in theory, have better self-control than a teenager. Actually removing these distractions takes either serious self-discipline or serious parental discipline. And for a lot of households, that second one is a luxury they simply cannot afford. A single parent working 2 jobs is not going to police screen time the same way a wealthier household can, when they can afford a stay-at-home parent, private tuition, or a school that has banned phones entirely. So the class gap compounds. Wealthier kids are more likely to end up in environments that still make them figure things out. Everybody else is more likely to end up in environments explicitly designed to never ask them to. And then on top of all of this, we have AI, which is the third and probably the biggest of these compounding problems. In theory, large language models are a genuinely powerful learning tool. For a disciplined student or professional, they can explain a concept a dozen different ways, simulate tutoring, and take a lot of the drudgery out of real knowledge work. Sure, they like to make a lot of shit up on the fly, but so do regular human educators, and some models can be asked to provide sources and citations along the way. In practice, well, that's not really how most people have been using them. The Digital Education Council's 2024 survey found that 86% of university students now use generative AI in their studies, and separate research from Best Colleges found that more than half of them used it specifically to cheat an assignment or an exam. Teachers trying to catch this are fighting an arms race they are quietly losing, because the detection tools are themselves wrong enough to be effectively useless in a disciplinary setting, which has led to an entire cohort of students passing through school without ever doing the exact activity that used to build the figuring things out muscle in the first place, and the job market has gone through a mirror image of the same thing. Applicants use AI to fire off hundreds of customized resumes and cover letters a week. Employers respond by running their own AI filters over the resulting flood of applications, rejecting most of them before a human ever sees them. The end result is a hiring process where a machine is writing the application, another machine is reading it, and a real human is just getting a polite email saying, "We have decided to go in another direction." And while all of this is happening, AI is being sold to schools as a cost-effective way to replace teachers, and to companies as a cheap way to replace their junior workers who would, on a normal career path, have been the ones actually doing the work that teaches people how to figure things out. Every layer of the system that used to teach people how to think through an unfamiliar problem is being quietly removed, and sold back to us as progress. Now, there is an obvious fix to almost all of this. You could put friction back in. Harder curricula with no open book policies, phones out of school, real consequences for AI cheating, hiring processes that involve an actual human reading an actual piece of work from an actual candidate, financial products that actually make you look at what you are spending before you spend it, and programs that prioritize functionality over ease of use. Almost none of this is going to happen, and the reasons why are not mysterious. The market rewards the frictionless product, and any single business that tries to add friction back in loses instantly to a competitor that doesn't. Parents cannot win a technology war against companies with literal billions of dollars and teams of behavioral scientists engineered specifically to keep their kids engaged. Regulators who, to put it generously, are at least a generation older than the technology they are meant to regulate have no real framework for any of this.
But that there is a school system that's going to start making sure that first graders or even pre-Ks have A1 teaching, every year starting, that far down in the grades. And that's a wonderful thing.
And budget cuts to public schools mean that every education system is leaning harder into AI, not less, because a chatbot that costs nothing will always win the line item fight against a human teacher that costs a salary. From the market's point of view, things are already working exactly as intended. And if you want further proof of that, go and watch this video next to find out how we are slowly becoming unemployable. And don't forget to like and subscribe to keep on learning how money works.